They are known as majestic creatures, an elegant predator, a highly social animal, a symbol of the wilderness. We're talking about gray wolves. The once abundant population of wolves centuries ago has today dwindled to almost nothing here in the U.S., relatively speaking. How has that happened over the many decades, and why is this still happening these days? We traveled to Southern California, then through the West and on out to Montana to find out about the campaign to save the gray wolf. And that's where we begin our broadcast. This is Team Wolf. Peter Kariva, Samantha Atwood, Kevin Alice, Jeff Ewelt. 4 people, 4 stories, all working together with a common cause. Their goal, to save the gray wolf. Team Wolf says much of the gray wolf population is now extinct. Experts estimate there are just a few thousand wolves left in the entire continental United States. And in recent years, they say, several states have begun an even more aggressive killing campaign against wolves.
Wolves have been persecuted throughout history, so they've been, shot from airplanes, bow and arrow, many different guns, night vision scopes, snare traps, poison, and so forth. Right now, in the continental U.S., they can be trapped, and when they're trapped, it's a pretty cruel fate.
The Aquarium of the Pacific in Long Beach, California, and the group RelistWolves, as well as other organizations, are collaborating on a new project to help save the wolf population. The origin of this project, in part, began with Aquarium President and CEO Dr. Peter Kariva. Kariva is also the chief scientist for the RelistWolves campaign, and he's a conservation biologist as well. Over 2 decades ago, Kariva was involved in a study with wolves, and in his words, the arbitrary and inhumane way human beings were killing wolves.
So the Aquarium Pacific, and like all aquaria and zoos, is really involved in conservation, and we're very much about empathy and getting kids to understand animals and connect to them. So when we see what's happening to the wolves, the same thing happens to species we care about. The same thing happens to the sharks off the coast. The same thing happens to sea otters. So we're in the business of teaching the public what the real fears are of predators and to really connect with animals. So it's pretty natural for us to engage with wolves.
Now, some 20 years later, this has become a political battle of sorts. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service had designated the authority of managing the wolf population to the states. However, the states, according to Kariva, have not been properly managing the wolves. In fact, Kariva insists the states do not know how to manage them. Kariva says the net result of this mismanagement has been the overkilling of thousands of wolves who are getting shot in various states throughout the U.S. like Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming, for example.
We've learned enough that there's really no scientific reason for this killing campaign. In fact, that's why I got involved with RelistWolves campaign. So initially, Fish and Wildlife Service took them off the endangered species list because they felt there were enough abundant and that the states would manage them thoughtfully. It's turned out the states have not managed them thoughtfully. I would just like to see us be sensible about wolves and both understand their value to us and don't exaggerate the damage they do.
Kariva explains there's unfortunately not much public data on exactly how many of these wolves are being killed and captured. So now Kariva is on a personal crusade to try and get this data from the federal government through things like public records requests. He also insists humans do not have to be afraid of wolves. He says the government info that's available to validate that claim is extremely vague and lacks any comprehensive or substantive context. Say, for example, information about the deaths of cows, deer, moose, elk, or other livestock as a result of wolves.
Wolves do take livestock, but we have to put it in context. It's 112 million cattle in the U.S. now, 112 million. 4 million a year die of unwanted causes. That's what the ranchers don't want. Out of those 4 million, only 1 in 10,000 is killed by a wolf. So if you're a rancher, of all the things you're going to worry about taking your livestock, wolves should be at the bottom of your list.
So now Kariva is trying to get the wolves relisted as an endangered species, in part because Kariva says wolves are a vital part of our ecosystem and they should never be shot unless absolutely necessary, and there is just no other way if the wolf presents an imminent threat.
Wolves are what biologists call a keystone species. That keystone comes from in an archway, like a stone arch. The keystone sits there and it holds everything in place. And without it, everything falls apart. And in a sense, that's what happens when you take wolves out of an ecosystem. Everything falls apart. Overgrazing, sedimentation of streams, and so forth. The public needs to understand that they really aren't doing that much damage. And in fact, if anything, they're a net plus to ecosystems and to human society.
The Relist Wolves campaign is a national, grassroots coalition of several different organizations and many different people who, simply put, care a lot about wolves. The collaboration includes various conservationists, scientists, non-governmental organizations, even Native American tribes who share the common goal of restoring endangered species and adding safety nets to the gray wolf. Samantha Atwood is with the Relist Wolves campaign.
The Relist Wolves campaign is really focused on breaking out of the conservation echo chamber, where we want to look at things a little bit differently and talk to the public and make people realize they have a voice. Every bit counts, and wolves are really beautiful, majestic, important animals with a family structure a lot like ours. They have parents, they have kids, the parents teach the kids, they're highly social, highly intelligent, and we really want people to see their value from an ecosystem perspective and feel like they want to be part of this conservation success story. Now, we're trying to accomplish this in a number of ways. And really important way is public advocacy and making sure the public is aware of what's going on with the wolves. In Wisconsin, where over 218 wolves were killed in under 60 hours, we thought we have to do something about this. They're being overhunted, and a lot of it is due to fear.
Samantha claims anti-wolf groups, some ranchers, and some hunters throughout the U.S. are perpetuating that fear and in fact making false claims.
Let's start with the ways they're being hunted. It's very cruel, running them down with packs of dogs, ATVs, hunting at night, hunting from helicopters. There's no such thing as a fair fight when it comes to the way wolves are being hunted right now. Now, as to whether they should be hunted at all, we in the campaign personally believe that there are a lot more effective ways to actually manage wolves and to coexist with them, such as fencing. You can have livestock guardian dogs, even flags that put up will keep wolves away. If a cow dies, cleaning it up really quickly so it doesn't attract predators or scavengers. Hunting wolves should be a last resort, and right now it is the first thing people think about, and that is really what is wrong with this situation.
They're a part of who we are. They're a part of the land that shapes who we are as community and as people.
Kevin Alice is the president of Thunderbird Strategic LLC, a government relations organization in Washington, D.C. Kevin is also a lobbyist and the former CEO of the National Congress of American Indians, the oldest American Indian advocacy organization in the U.S. Kevin says the organization exists to make sure the U.S. honors its treaty and trust responsibilities owed to all the U.S. tribal nations.
My grandfather was our tribal chairman through the 1950s and 1960s, one of the most difficult periods for Indian country because it was the termination period where this country was trying to terminate its relations with the tribal nations. And my great-grandfather was our tribal leader at the turn of the last century. So being in front of these issues that affect tribal nations, not only my own community, but those across the country, has been flowing through my blood for several generations. So I'm one of the many foot soldiers. Gray wolf is a very sacred figure in Indian country. It's a part of our ecosystem. It's a part of our environment. It's an animal that our nations have coexisted alongside and have lived with for thousands of years. It's also an animal that is a very, let me call it, religious figure in Indian country. The wolf is a part of almost every tribal community's creation story. From our very beginnings of time, the wolf walked alongside the creators of what we know to be our world today.
Kevin agrees with Peter Kariva that today, wolf conservation is partly a political battle.
This government promised tribal nations, when it entered into treaties with hundreds of tribes 150 plus years ago, that they would do everything possible to safeguard those things that are important to us. And this is certainly one of those, the existence of the wolf. And when we look at the possible things that we could do, we could take this to the court and convince judges. We can take this to legislators and convince them, which we are doing. But one of the most important populations that we really need to get to understand the reality of who the wolf is and what it is not is public opinion. We have seen legislation in the past that has taken a false narrative, has taken bits and pieces of something without all the other information and actually passed legislation that's been detrimental to the wolf.
Jeff Ewelt also says he cannot let that happen. Jeff is the executive director of Zoo Montana in Billings, Montana. Jeff and Zoo Montana are also joining with RelistWolves to help save wolves.
So Zoo Montana is actively involved with wolf conservation for a couple reasons. First and foremost, as one of the biggest cultural attractions in the state of Montana, we feel the responsibility to do all we can to give a voice to the animals that call our facility home. In this particular instance, wolves are what we're talking about. When we were contacted by the Relist Wolf campaign, it was a no-brainer for us to get involved. Interestingly enough, though, in the state of Montana, getting involved with pro-wolf work is a calculated risk. When we came forward with the fact that we are a pro-wolf organization, as most people would think we are, we received death threats. We also received a threat of loss of funding as well. So it was a risky venture.
A risky venture that Ewelt hopes is going to eventually pay off despite the challenges for Zoo Montana and their own potential danger.
In the state of Montana especially, the wolf debate is a divisive one. It's turned rather political, and unfortunately, wolves are not well liked in our state. And so for that reason, we feel that we need to do what we can in order to get the right information out there. Unfortunately, wolves are victims of misinformation. There is so much misinformation about what wolves are and what they do. And not everybody wants to hear that. And so we feel obligated that we not only need to educate and teach our guests, but we need to work on our legislators that call Montana home, and we need to let them understand that unfortunately, if they eradicate this species, the results of that are going to be devastating.
Ewelt says the wolf dilemma in the Treasure State is partly a matter of dollars and cents.
In Montana, it affects people's pocketbooks, and I think money talks, and I think a lot of the hate that comes from these predators are because of that, whether it's affecting a local ranch or it may be affecting a hunter and their ability to get that trophy elk. Again, there's that misinformation when in reality what wolves are doing is they're actually benefiting the elk population, the deer population, through keeping the ecosystem in balance. However, unfortunately in the western states, it all comes down to money.
Ewelt explains that eliminating the wolf population from the ecosystem and creating that ecosystem imbalance he speaks of results in things like the elk, moose, and deer populations getting overpopulated and basically out of control. Then that overpopulation results in these animals leaving their habitat in the hills, and instead they graze at bodies of water like lakes or rivers, for example, thus eliminating crucial vegetation. And then when that vegetation is gone, the area where the land and water connect is not protected. And Ewelt says that's when fish are killed off and the entire ecosystem, in his words, is threatened. So now Ewelt says Zoo Montana collaborates with RelistWolves to educate people of all ages who visit his zoo that wolves must be treated with care and compassion. Ewelt says connecting with wolves is part of the answer to saving them.
Try to take the political aspect out of it and make a decision for yourself and understand why every animal on this planet, from the tiniest mosquito to the amazing wolf, has a role to play. We may not want to admit that as humans, but it's true. Every single animal on this planet is here for a particular reason.
And to find out more about wolves, just click on relistwolves.org. That's relistwolves.org for more information. Now, certainly there is more to this story. Another point of view, in this case, the rancher's point of view. We want all voices here. That's what we do on this program. We want everyone to be heard. So joining me now for that part of the discussion is Bruce Gillespie, known as Butch, and Doreen Gillespie, a great duo. We are interviewing them. They are in Montana. Bruce and Doreen are ranchers from the great state of Montana. Butch is also a Republican Montana state senator, and Doreen, well, she's also the chairperson of the Livestock Loss Board in Montana. Thank you both so much for being here.
Thank you for having us. Appreciate it.
Yes.
So Butch and Doreen, before we even get to the discussion, Doreen, I have to tell our audience this. Both a Democrat governor and a Republican governor, different administrations obviously, appointed you to the Livestock Loss Board. So you're obviously quite popular. Talk about that and then explain exactly what is this Livestock Loss Board?
Well, here in Montana, we go by what you accomplish rather than maybe your party. I mean, we do have differences, but if they feel you're a really good person for the job and you happen to live where the problem is, you're a good representation to be sitting on a board, which is a Livestock Loss Board. The Livestock Loss Board was started in 2007 because of the degradation that is happening on the prairie from mountain lions, wolves, and grizzly bears. And we had to try to compensate the ranchers because it's their livelihood, and it's no different than if someone would go into a store and just start taking everything off the shelves and walking out with it. Pretty soon the store would not be able to survive. Some of our smaller producers, that's the same thing there. If we don't try to help them get through this crisis, they won't survive.
Doreen, with that said, before we talk to Butch, tell me what kind of ranchers you folks are. In other words, talk about the ranching life, your farming life.
Well, we've been ranching for 50 years. Butch and I got married 51 years ago in July, it'll be. And we have had, we've raised club calves, which is kind of it's a different thing to do. You raise steers for kids to take to shows, 4-H, FFA, and we've been, we're really, really good to our cattle. We try to treat them as quietly as we can. You never can determine what an animal is going to do, but we like to keep them quiet because if these calves are going to kids, we want the kids to be safe with them. But yeah, I love cattle. I think they're amazing. Well, I don't know that I should say I love them. I enjoy raising cattle, and I enjoy being able to feed people from the product that we produce.
Now, Butch, to be fair, as I mentioned earlier, to this issue of wolves and wolf conservation, obviously ranchers whose livelihood is livestock and must protect that livestock, you all possibly have a very different take on the wolves situation. Can you talk about that, Butch, and then we'll get Doreen's take on that?
Okay, I guess number one, as ranchers, the last thing we want to see is have the wolf population to be almost non-existent, because then there would be a real valid excuse to put them back on the endangered species list. So to me, it's all about balance. It's not having too many, and it's definitely not having enough either. And of course, that differs with who you are. But from a rancher's perspective, and a lot of other people, they do make a big difference if there's a lot of them in your area. And unfortunately, Montana is one of the few states that have a lot of wolves. So we probably get over inundated with them, and therefore the reason to be able to control the population to a reasonable level.
Doreen, your take on protecting your own livestock, again, it's your livelihood. Wolves could be jeopardizing that livelihood.
Yeah, I can't imagine anything worse than being around cattle that you've been working with, and you try to be quiet with them, you try to be good to them, you treat them as good as you can, and to watch a bunch of wolves come in and literally just rip them apart. As I don't know if you've ever heard of cattle when they're hurt, but I don't know if I could handle that. We lost a few cattle off the rim one year because we live where there's rims, and my husband went up to see how it was. He went up with a gun. And it still makes me sad when the gun started going off. It killed me.
Just to follow up on that, what she means by the rim, we lived in a place where a sheer drop-off was like anywhere from maybe 30 to 50 feet to over 300 feet. So and in this case, a really bad storm just came on. It was a hailstorm in the middle of the summer, totally unexpected. and we had some of them get driven over, and
some of them didn't die. So
yeah, so the humane thing to do is to do what we had to do.
And I apologize, but I still, you know, we like animals. We don't like killing any animals. So that was tough to take.
No apology necessary, Doreen. It's an emotional issue. To that point, Doreen, is there possibly a justification to killing wolves? And I preface that with saying, if certainly there is just no other option.
Well, I believe that if you are in danger and someone is gonna, well, I'll just put it this way, because it's our livelihood and it's our money. And if someone would walk into a bank and start stealing all the money that you have in that bank, and a police officer would come in to defend the fact that this person was stealing, and he'd point the gun at the officer, the only recourse the officer would have would be to defend himself. That's the same way I look at it, as when the wolves are stealing our income, and the only option we have is to defend ourselves. It's not that we want to kill the animal, but we want to be able to also keep our money, our value.
Yes, definitely. Butch, you are a legislator in Montana, a state senator, as I mentioned earlier. What are you hearing from the folks in your great state about this complicated issue, and is there any legislation you're working on regarding this issue of wolves?
We did have some in the past legislative session, and just so people understand, we do only meet for 4 months every 2 years here in Montana. So that's when all of our bills get passed. So the next time we'll be meeting is this coming January through April of next year. So, but in the last session we had, they did relax some of the laws in cooperation with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, trying to, there again, come back to that balance, that happy medium, that when you have too many, some kind of population control needs to happen, but never to the extent that there's not going to be enough of them. And you got to remember, Montana is inundated with wolves, and they do reproduce very prolifically. So kind of like coyotes, it seems like we never run out of them.
Doreen and Butch, both of you heard the comments from the Zoo Montana folks in my field report earlier, basically saying, you ranchers, you hunters in your state, well, you're the problem, and they cited this as being a money issue. What do you say to that, Doreen?
Well, I guess it disappoints me, because it's suggesting that we don't know how to handle things and we don't know what to do. I'm sure that gentleman, when he runs that zoo, does the very best job that he can possibly do. And for him to make a comment like that when he's probably completely unaware of what our business does and how we run things is a rather unfair statement, and it disappoints me. I wished, in fact, next time I go to Billings, I'd like to have a very nice visit with him to kind of maybe let him know what we do so he'll understand who we are.
Butch, your opinion of some of the interviews you heard in my field report from the activists and the folks really trying to save the lives of wolves?
I guess a couple of things. One, it's so easy to cherry pick data, and you can go to one set of data and make it say one thing, and you can turn right around and the same set of data interpret it a different way. So I think that's something we have to really watch out for. And we're looking at it, hopefully with our from a rancher's perspective, with our eyes wide open at both sides of the issue, where somebody else that maybe don't even live in Montana, don't have to deal with the consequences, can look at it from a very narrow point of view and obviously promote a whole different concept. And then also, that is a great way to raise money, is, people that aren't around wild animals can be really swayed just with the right argument, with the right TV thing. So we have to be mindful of all those things too. And like I say, achieve a happy balance.
So Butch, the billion-dollar question, you speak of the rancher's perspective. From a rancher's perspective, what happens if these wolves do get back on the endangered species list?
Yeah, then it gets really rough because, it gets really rough for wildlife, other wildlife, and then it gets really, really rough for the ranchers too, or anybody that, and this can, a lot of times is small farms and ranches too. It's not these big operations that people think of. It's family farmers and ranchers, and there's such a slim margin in raising food to feed the population all over the world that there's no room for much air. And we're talking about these young and a lot of them are young farmers and ranchers. And, do we want the movie stars and maybe the sports people that make an awful lot of money buying up our ranches because people are going broke because they can't afford to live with the predators?
Doreen, in our final remaining minute, as I say, I try to be as fair as possible and have all voices heard on this program, Sustaining Us. With that said, in the report, the RelistWolves campaign folks, some of them are sort of hinting that you guys and others are giving misinformation, possibly even being misleading, maybe even dishonest about wolf killings. What's your take with their campaign and what they're saying? Because they really believe in their message and they're fighting for what they believe in.
I guess I'm confused about that, but if people want to know what is happening here in Montana, we have a Facebook page. Go to Livestock Loss Board Montana, and you can see the government data on there, and that is actual proof. In fact, I asked my executive director about this 1%. What they're doing is they're using USDA stats, taking in where there are not wolves. So there's not all the states that have wolves. So they're taking this and then it's putting it out across the United States, and it can look like 1%. But my executive director also told me when wolves were on the endangered species list in 2008 and 9, losses were getting out of control. 300 head from wolves alone could put producers out of business. But go to the Livestock Loss Board of Montana Facebook page, and George Edwards, our executive director, has all the factual government stats right on there, and then they will know the truth, because that's exactly where you can find it.
Doreen Gillespie and Butch Gillespie from the great state of Montana, thank you both so much for your interviews. Greatly appreciated.